search and never find, to those that turn away the so-called non-accepted, to those that bring us together, and to those living outside, keep in touch, the voice.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Community Classroom. This is Dr. Tracy McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and this is going to be our final installment related to American Indians and Native Americans for the Community Classroom project, and we are finishing up with a brief discussion on names, the names that people give other people and the names that people call themselves. And we're going to delve quickly into the names of American Indian and Native American and ask the question, which one is most appropriate for you? And so if you are classifying yourself under either of these monikers, you have some thinking to do related to what these names actually mean. Now, there are historic meanings attached to these names, and there are legal meanings attached to these names. The question, however, is what does the name mean to you? And in terms of history, 100 years from now, what will be the understanding of that name in terms of your identity? So what will your descendants understand you as? What will people understand you as if there is no law that says American Indian or Native American? What does it just mean socially and culturally and psychologically to have those names? What does it mean in terms of this national identity? As always, if this video appears on anything other than Dr. Tracy McCarthy, it is stolen and unauthorized. Let's get started. And we're going to quickly look at this little distance map so that people can be reminded of the distance between India and the Americas. According to the legend, the travelers were trying to get to India, and they somehow ended up in the Americas and thought they were in India, and then proceeded to name the people what they thought the people should be based upon where they claimed they thought they were. And so it's helpful to look at this distance map to see how far apart India was from the Americas and how far away Spain and Portugal might have been from India. And you can see the different routes, and you can see how difficult it would probably be for someone to mistake being in India when they are actually in the Americas. They are on very small islands compared to that huge peninsula that is India. So we may preserve Mother Earth for ancestors yet to come. Now let's jump into this discussion about naming with a look at adjectives and nouns. Now in the previous video there was a question about the census and census designations, and individuals were asked the question related to which one of these statuses appeared to be a status that indicated American. And people had different answers. And so what I want to do is bring your attention to the dynamic of adjectives and nouns. And so when you are looking at an adjective, it's important to remember that an adjective modifies the noun. And so it basically tells you about either a quality or quantity related to the noun. And so it gives the noun distinction. And so here's an example at the bottom where you have car. And when you add red to car, you have the red car, and the red is the adjective for the noun car. And so basically what this is doing is it is telling you what type of car you have. And so that's what red is doing for this. It is modifying that idea of car. And deny the honor that the Creator has given each individual. Okay, let's start off with African American in terms of understanding this dynamic of adjectives in terms of identity. So you have African American, which is sometimes a very controversial term. And many people actually think of this in the reverse. They are actually thinking mentally sometimes American African. But what you have here is the noun is American and the adjective is African. And so what this is saying is that the person is American first and foremost, and the African is telling you what type of American they are. So you could put other things in front of American. You could put a female American, a male American, a Southern American, a European American, a Hispanic American, an Asian American. You can put a number of things in front of American, but American is the thing that stays constant. It is the constant. And then that African is a variable. It's the thing that varies. Adjectives vary. And so when you had that other example that we were looking at the other video, what you were seeing is that African American was the one identity that was claiming the American identity. And so simply claiming to be white or black or Hispanic or Asian, that does not necessarily indicate that a person is identifying as American. In fact, this is the one that is the American identifier in that example with those statuses. And here you can see in this other definition that an African American is first and foremost an American. And so the person is an American with the modifier of African and especially of Black African descent. So again, the first thing is American. That's the noun. And then the qualifier is the African part. And you can see down below that the first known use of African American, contrary to popular belief, was back in 1782. And here's just a quick look at a basic definition of American. So you have an American is an American Indian of North America or South America. And then you have a native or inhabitant of North America or South America. And so you have in that part of the definition, the person can be native to America, or they can simply be an inhabitant and then be classified as an American. Then third, you have a native or inhabitant of the United States. Basically, a United States citizen is an American. Now let's look at this definition of Native American, and we're going to think about this again in terms of adjectives. And so again, you have this noun, which is American, and then you have this modifier, which is native. So it's telling you what type of American. It is a Native American, not a naturalized American, not any other type of American. This is a Native American, and a Native American is a member of any of the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. So this is a lot of people. So you're talking about the entire Western Hemisphere is what the understanding of Native American is in this definition. That's a huge area. Okay, and then you have especially a Native American of North America and especially the U.S. And here you have a little bit more clarity. You have a Native American is a member of any of the first groups of people living in North America or South America. And this becomes very important because there is a slight distinction between being native and being the first. And we talked about that in the other video. This is about being first in time. And that becomes the most important thing when you're talking about that First Nation dynamic. And in this way, Canada, really gets this right in terms of the identifier by saying First Nations. They are identifying that those were the first people. And then you have a member of one of these groups from the United States. Then there's a simple kids definition, basically a member of any of the first groups of people in North or South America. And now I want you to think about another type of American. You have American again, and in front of American this time, you have Indian American or Indo-Americans. Now these Americans, again, the noun is American. and they are Americans with ancestry from the ethnic groups of the Republic of India. So again, they are Americans, and the type of American is an Indian American, and so that's the adjective.
No longer know who they are. To those who search and never find, to those that turn away the so-called.
Now we're going to look at the word Indian. This is important. When you look at Indian, you see the definition of Indian and you see 1 and 2. 1 is the primary definition, and then 2 would be the secondary definition. And so the 1 would be the most important. So you have the definition of Indian. It is a native or inhabitant of India or of the East Indies. Second, a person of Indian descent, and that is in the primary definition. It is only in the secondary definition that you get American Indian out of this definition. And so Indian primarily means someone who is a native or inhabitant of India, the East Indies, not the West Indies, or a person who is descended from one of those inhabitants. And again, with this second definition, you see a person born, raised, or living in India. Again, then with the kids definition, you have 1 of 2, and you have again that primary definition for Indian being a person born or living in India. And then the secondary definition is an American Indian. And so this raises the question of how individuals in America came to be identified as Indian, how the laws were written related to Indians versus Americans.
The old, the living, and the dead. To our brothers and sisters and all living things.
Now let's look at this definition of American Indian. What it basically says here is a member of any of the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere, except often those distinguished as Eskimo, basically. So from Alaska, Alaskan natives. And then you have especially American Indian or North American, and especially in the United States. And so you have this definition of American Indian, and it specifies that it is specific for indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere again. So you've got that whole Western Hemisphere dynamic going on, except the Alaskan natives. And then the kids definition focuses on that dynamic of first people groups. And so a member of any of the first groups of people to live in North and South America. And so again, that first in time, that first owner of the home.
To our brothers and sisters and all living things across Mother Earth, and for you.
Now let's look at the etymology of these two terms and try to get an understanding of why one was selected over the other, or why they are used interchangeably. What you'll notice here is that the first term used to identify the people who are also understood as indigenous or Indian in America, the first term was Native American. It was not American Indian. And the first term came about in 1628. So this is when the settlers first arrived, or very early on. The term was Native American. Only later in 1650 did the term American Indian emerge. Now this is an interesting turn of events given the fact that an Indian then was understood as someone from the subcontinent in the East. And so a question would be, why would they name individuals American Indian when they knew at that time for sure that they definitely were not in India? And so what was the dynamic that was going on? Another question is, were there two groups of people that have now been conflated? And so did you have the Native Americans, and then did you have the introduction of Indians who then became American Indians. And so American Indian is basically, when you're talking about that adjective and that noun, the noun is Indian. And so the noun is specifying someone from India, particularly in 1650. The noun is specifying someone from India. And then the adjective is the American part. And so what the American Indian is saying is that the person is first and foremost Indian. And the type of Indian they are is an American one. Native American, however, is saying that the person is first and foremost American. And the type of American they are is a native one. And so one situates a person in India, and the other one situates a person in America. These two terms have been conflated. However, 100 years from now, again, or if you're not in America 100 years from now, if someone looks at this and they understand the English language, what they will come away with is those individuals identifying as American Indian are actually Indians from India who perhaps relocated and then took on that qualifier of American, whereas those who are identified as Native American would be understood as those who would be the indigenous ones to America. They are American first, and then that native part is the modifier. It qualifies the type of American. Again, this is food for thought for people to think about related to these two terms, why they are conflated, why they are used interchangeably, and why they came about in the first place. What was the purpose of the first one, and then what was the purpose of the second one? You have one coming about in 1628 and another one coming about in 1650, and why is that?
To our elders who teach us of our creation and our past, so we may preserve Mother Earth for ancestors.
Okay, now we're going to quickly look at this case that relates to this naming dynamic. We're not going to read the case, but this is a resource for you to look at so that you can get a better understanding of some of the arguments and discussions related to the naming and also the rights of the groups of people going by the names Native American and American Indian.
To those who fall for the lies and join the dividing lines that keep us fighting amongst each other.
And this case is out of 1902, and one of the things that it discusses is the definition of Indian and also the rights and privileges that individuals identified as Indian are entitled to as United States citizens. The court also discusses this dynamic of identifying an Indian as an individual who was basically found here inhabiting North America when it was found by those individuals who were later known as settlers. An additional dynamic discussed in this case is the idea that even though a person may not be living in quote-unquote Indian country and they may not be with their quote-unquote tribe or their nation, they still maintain that identity as Indian.
Innocent or guilty. To the young, the old, the learned.
And so as we are wrapping this up, the question comes up again, what is the appropriate name for yourself if you are identifying as Native American or American Indian? What is the name that is going to give you the identity that you think is most appropriate for you? What is the name that is going to give the identity that's going to be the most appropriate one for your descendants? What is the name that is going to help them to understand who you are and who they are? And what is the name that is going to speak to others about your understanding of your identity? Right now, if you take all of the laws away and you just have the words, you have terms that mean very different things. And so with Native American, you have a term that indicates that the person is American first and foremost, and they are a Native American. They are native to the land. You could also put Indigenous American in front of that, or Original American in front of that, but ultimately you have an American, indicating that the person is indigenous to this landmass. American Indian, however, just in terms of language and meaning, it says something else. It says that primarily the person is Indian, and India is a place. It is an actual place, and someone simply giving someone else the name of Indian when they are in another place does not change the fact that there are actual people in India with the identifier of Indian. And so the question becomes, what does that mean for you, and what does that mean for your descendants? And again, what is being communicated with that? Again, the question also is out there related to, are these two different groups? Are you talking about individuals, some of which are actually Indian descended? And are you talking about some individuals who are actually American descended in terms of earlier times? And so one of the things in terms of research that people might want to do is start to do a little bit more research on when Indians from India actually first arrived. A little bit of rudimentary research shows that they arrived a lot later than the 1600s. However, that may not be completely accurate, and so there may need to be a little bit more research done on that. But again, this may be a dynamic where there is a conflating of identities, or there is a using people as proxies. And so you may have a couple of dynamics going on here, but it would be important for individuals to try to disentangle those so that they have clarity about what it is they are saying about themselves, and you don't have confusion about who is who, whether you're talking about in the Americas or you're talking about in India, and in terms of how other people around the world are understanding people based upon the names that people are giving themselves and the names that they are allowing themselves to be called. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care and see you soon.